The response I got from that one is where I really got concerned. And that was, I know one of the men involved. There's no way that guy did that, knowing him, his family, and otherwise. I can't help you. Please keep going. There's a story here.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Grey, and this is Grey Matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Well, today we're going to talk about journalism. What is journalism? What is it becoming? You know, as mass media abandons the principles of truth and objectivity and integrity that once gave it our trust as a public viewing audience, people are turning to alternative sources to get news and information. And this trend, combined with advances in media technology, has given rise to a new breed of journalists, one that does not come from the stodgy, dusty halls of a university journalism program, but sometimes they come from places like rural Alberta, like our guest today, who has become a rising star in independent journalism. And his name is Jason Lavigne. Thanks for being with us today, Jason.
Thank you, Leighton. I really appreciate that intro. And you're absolutely right about journalism. It's very different nowadays. So thank you for having me on to talk about what it looks like today. It's very different now.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about that and also some of the exciting stories that you have been covering and also some of the other things that you're involved with, like the National Citizens Inquiry that we talk about a lot on this show. But before we go there, before we introduce you properly and sort of get into your origin story, as we always do, we're going to go to our framing aphorisms. You'll see these have been chosen in your honor along the theme of journalism. The first one is from Ray Bradbury, who's a very famous science fiction author. Wrote one of my favorite books, Fahrenheit 451, which if you read that book, it'll explain a lot about what's going on in our world today. He wrote that journalism keeps you planted in the earth. Secondly, from an author that we quote a lot on this show, C.S. Lewis, he says, "Isn't it funny how day by day nothing changes, but when you look back, everything is different?" Next, from maybe one of the most quoted people anywhere right now, the late, great George Orwell, who wrote, "Journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations." And of course, he's referring to his experience of journalism, which in his time was the printed word. But I would argue that today that has been surpassed by the platform that we're on right now. People now are consuming video and audio much more than the printed word. And finally, from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote, "Let the lie come into the world, let it even triumph, but not through me. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie." And if only our mass media would listen to such advice. So, Jason, I wanted to talk about you a little bit and kind of introduce people. And a lot of people on our program know who you are. They've been following your show. But when I researched you and your biography, some very interesting things came forward. I learned that you were born in northern Manitoba, which really struck me because my late father is from St. Boniface. You were raised on the prairies around Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I was born in Regina. And that you later attended Fort Richmond Collegiate in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Yes.
But that prior to returning to the prairies in 2022, you started building a family homestead near Breton, Alberta. And that led you on a very interesting journey. And ultimately, you ran as a candidate in the federal election. Is that correct?
I'm running in the next federal election, so I was not part of the last one, but I'm running in the next one, which is hopefully 2025 or sooner.
Right, as an independent. And so, yes. Right, so I'd be interested to know a little bit about your background. I know that you worked or you trained as a paralegal. And so you have a lot of legal background, but what was it that attracted you to journalism?
Excellent questions. And yeah, you do have my general starting story correct. Born in northern Manitoba, early years in Saskatoon, middle years, high school years in Winnipeg. So near St. Boniface. I know that area well. I was in Fort Richmond for most of that time. And then I went out east to go ahead and pursue a career in technology. It wasn't law to begin with. Became an entrepreneur, did participate in some startups, successful and not successful. Had a lot of learning the hard way, lots of errors, but as an entrepreneur, that's a great way to learn. Ended up looking into law more as a necessary tool as an individual who's going to have a successful career, including in entrepreneurship. I did find that I was involved in litigation or civil litigation as plaintiff or defendant for various matters, whether good or bad. I did understand early that I would have to learn how to handle and be a recipient of litigation. As the more you grow, you will learn, and as the more you have, you will learn that there are going to be reasons to have a comfortable understanding of the law. So that's my purpose for becoming licensed paralegal in Ontario at the age of 40 is when I wrote the exam. So I started at the age of 38, taking the courses and finishing all that up. And on my 40th birthday, February 14th, 2017, I did write the exam and pass as a paralegal. So this was later in my career. And then I used that experience to understand the law. I did practice for a bit, small claims court, traffic court, those kind of items, which is available to a paralegal in Ontario. And that was just to learn the system and understand law so I wasn't intimidated going forward. And that was my real purpose. And then I decided when COVID hit, there were some other situations that I wasn't comfortable with for Ontario. We had a small homestead there, 1 acre. We maxed it out. We didn't have any more room for garden or anything else. That was one of the motivations to head out west to Alberta to find some more land and to build our homestead and raise our children. So that's really the genesis. But before I came to Alberta in 2020, it was 2020 that I came to Alberta. 2021, apologies,
Yeah.
May of 2021. Yes.
Well, we're so glad that you did. But you glossed over a couple of things though that are really fascinating. You said your birthday is February 14th, which is obviously St. Valentine's Day. However, it's also the anniversary of the declaring of the Emergencies Act. And it just so happens that we have something else in common, Jason, as I also have a February birthday. Mine is on the 20th. But how extraordinary is it that your birthday, given the types of stories that you've come to cover, that your birthday was on that wasn't a very nice gift from Justin Trudeau in 2022 to Jason Lavigne, or was it? Because it set you on this path where you have really organized your journalism and focused your journalism on some of these huge stories that are impacting Canada. And coming back to my introduction, you're focused on stories that the mass media has largely ignored, and arguably two of the biggest stories of the 20th century, 21st century, I should say, connected: the Freedom Convoy and the Coutts 4. So let's start. Maybe we could jump to the kind of the origins of your podcast and tell us how that's connected to not only your birthday, but what happened in Ottawa a couple of years ago.
February 22nd, 2022, when Trudeau went on the media and explained to us that they were going to revoke the Emergency Act, the use of the Emergency Act. And he explained to us how it was necessary. And then en français, so in French, he did say, if you don't agree with what I did here, the proper way to deal with this is to become a candidate, run against me, and go ahead and bring forward your supporters and change law.
Right.
I agreed. So February 22nd was the day I decided I'm going to become a candidate, run as an MP, and go ahead and get into that office. I was very determined at that point because of the injustice I did see immediately from my birthday and on, and even prior to that, when Trudeau was calling this group of people to various names and framing a narrative that was so obviously not true. I had the journalism bite at that point because I was watching live streams from people walking around instead of the mainstream. I was watching the news stream, I guess we can call it, the Viva Fries and the Zots and the other people walking around showing us what's going on. That's what helped me understand what was going on for real. And this was without any Coutts connection, because early in February 2022, we didn't really know about the Coutts connection until, those firearms were found, and it kind of snowballed from there, but not in my mind. In my mind, it was Ottawa. I was focused on Ottawa and seeing the pictures from there. We weren't seeing pictures from Coutts. So my initial passion to start the podcast was my desire to become a successful MP, and my recognition that being an independent MP in a riding like Yellowhead, which is 5 hours tip to tip, so it's very rural, would require a lot of public persona and a public platform, so that people can get to know me, understand who I am, and see what it is I can do. And I believe that a podcast, in a way of helping people, was a good way to demonstrate those skills to my neighbors. So that's what led to my coverage of the Public Order Emergency Commission in October of 2022. And that's when I started my podcast. It was to cover the Public Order Emergency Commission. So that's the genesis.
And it's grown just exponentially. Like, you've had some of the people you talk about, the Viva Fry, you've had them on your show, you've been on his show. And you have to be, Jason, one of the hardest working journalists in this space. I mean, you have a 2 hour, you broadcast twice each day at least. You've got a morning show from 6 to 8 in the morning. You often have your friend Donald Best on there, and then you have another show in the evening, and then you're often on panel discussions. Like, where do you find the time and the energy to do all of this broadcasting? And then on top of that, you're also a very, very aggressive investigator, so that you're not just going on your show, talking, as a host of some talk show. You're coming on here and you're breaking stories. Where do you find all the time and the energy to do this? It really is quite remarkable.
Well, I think the easiest way to explain this to most people is I don't see it as work. I see this as an education. I consider this the MP boot camp. So Member of Parliament boot camp. This is how I see it. And this is why it doesn't seem to be like work to me. I get the privilege of meeting 2, 3, 4 different people every single day to interview them, understand where they're coming from, what are the issues that are important to them. I seek out topics and guests for specific purposes so I can learn that subject matter and actually have some of it in my understanding as I'm making my way through what's going on in this world. I also feel like I'm a bit of a bloodhound, that I'm following the scent, and I'm less of a German Shepherd, which is being told where to go, which would be the current media.
Occasionally you clamp onto somebody's ankle.
Yeah, well, the bloodhound can call in its friends, right? So I'm more of the sniffer, and then someone like a Donald Best would be more of the investigator. This is why Donald Best and I work well together, is I will be able to get the story and get people. It's the best way to put it, is people like to talk to me. They find me to be friendly, and they open up with me. And then Donald Best would be more of the, I see something here, or there's a flag here, or a badge of fraud, or something here that I don't even see. And I do have a bit of naivety in me where even sometimes I don't see it. He does, and I don't, which makes us a really good team. I'm able to get in there to meet the people, shake the hands, hear the stories. And as we're building that out and sharing that with everybody, he's also able to understand a different level from his experience. And sometimes we stumble upon issues that we weren't looking for it, but being the bloodhounds that we are, we follow the scent. And a couple of the stories have come out that way. It wasn't really proactive where we were searching for the story. The story found us, if that makes a little bit more sense.
Right.
And that's how that's been happening, especially with the Coutts situation, because it gets so little coverage that it requires somebody to speak with the family and the friends and the men. Everybody else, nobody else is doing that, for us to find things. For example, the injustice that we've been seeing with the Coutts situation, that happened by talking to everybody around the men, or with the men, and even people who are not associated to it, but understand things like the law and government. I've had, people from lawyers to police officers to ex-police officers to government, ex-government on to talk about stuff like that. And that's how, in my mind, as my boot camp to be an MP, this is the skill set that you would like to see in an MP. So this is why it doesn't feel like a job to me. It feels like a training.
That's a great explanation. And I want to talk more about the stories that you've been covering on your show. But before we go, I don't want to just dismiss this whole idea of you becoming an MP. First
Mhm.
of all, I sure wish that my MP worked as hard as you do. Our prime minister certainly doesn't, as you know.
Mhm.
But this idea of you becoming a member of parliament um, is an interesting situation. Now, you are not affiliated with any particular party, and that's by design, isn't it? You're by choice and independent. You want to explain about that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say the better way to explain it is I'm adjacent to the parties. So the PPC,
Nice
I'm
pun. Nice
friendly
pun.
with, yeah, adjacent. Um,
Adjacent Lavigne.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I am friendly with the PPC. I'm also friendly with the CPC, and I'm also friendly with all my neighbors. So what that allows me to do is be a very good independent. I can speak to all of them and understand
Right.
them all. I have been offered the position by the PPC very early in my decision to
Not
ride.
surprising. Yeah.
Yeah, so candidate in waiting. I'm also an active member of the CPC party.
How are you?
Because one of
Okay.
well, I am a conservative, so I would say I'm an independent conservative.
Hmm.
That would be the better way to describe me. But I have become a member with the intention of challenging the incumbent. And if I can be successful at providing the support for my candidacy via the CPC party as an independent, which would be a new type of candidate, which I don't know if the party would accept. But if the party is in a position to go ahead and accept me as a candidate as an independent, I think that would actually help the CPC party in ways that they haven't considered before. By
Hmm.
being adjacent to everybody and being able to talk to everybody would give me a new way of bringing forward everybody's voice inside even the CPC. Now, I do have no disillusion that that would be an incredibly difficult path forward. And I do still think that the best representation for my neighbors would be an independent candidate with no party affiliation.
Hmm.
That would allow me to be as powerful as I can be as a representative and bring their voice directly to the House of Commons.
Hmm.
So I still believe that is the proper path and that would be the most fruitful, but it's also the
Hmm.
most difficult one. And that doesn't stop me. I think I can go ahead and demonstrate to my neighbors that an independent candidate with this skill set to be able to fight for truth and stand up to it is exactly the type of person that we want to send
Well,
to the House of Commons.
you've certainly exemplified all of those qualities on your podcast. So let's imagine for a moment that you were speaking directly to your constituents, the people who would vote for you.
Mhm.
How would you describe yourself as a candidate? Like, what do you stand for on economic and social and political policy? What things are most important to you? What would people in your constituency be getting if they sent you to Ottawa?
The first thing that I would like to teach and explain to everybody is the power of being independent and self sufficient. I think what I can do is demonstrate that, not just speak about it, but demonstrate that. Being a
Mhm.
self sufficient person, whether you're a homesteader or you just grow a garden or you take care of yourself in some way,
Or an
maybe it's
entrepreneur? Yeah,
entrepreneur or you're
yeah,
seeking truth through alternate media,
right.
whatever it is that you're doing that makes you more independent of the government and be able to be more self-sufficient would be what I'd love to demonstrate to my neighbors, because I do believe that that is a sustainable way forward for everybody to
Hmm.
have a very healthy independence of your government and a healthy relationship with your government. So what I would like to demonstrate to them is what a good healthy relationship with an MP to their constituents would be. And that would be somebody who's in front, talking to you, hunting down various stories, looking into certain situations, talking to the right people, and even doing things like mediating issues that you come along the way and find. Or sometimes, because of your work, and this has happened to me recently, I get pulled into issues to help mediate it and solve it. So I think what I will be able to do if I'm speaking directly to my constituents and say, what kind of person do you want? Do you want somebody who's going to go get into the trenches when needed, build the bridges when we're required, and advance your voice? Or a little bit more of the same what you had so far?
Hmm.
Conservative, yes, but conservative? I would absolutely be able to demonstrate to my neighbors that I would stand up to globalism. I would stand up to the global agenda. I would stand up for the children. I would
Hmm.
stand up for the parents. And I would stand up for the soon to be parents or maybe be parents. I'd stand up for my neighbors. And that's where I would put that focus is on teaching through example by leading that an independent, self-sufficient lifestyle is your most sustainable and generational way to move forward.
Mhm.
So I think that's where I would focus on.
Great. One of the people, one of the groups of people I know that are very important to you and that you speak on behalf of, and this is probably because of your background, are farmers. I know that you had a Jason Lavigne chats, and of course, farmers are people who not only in Alberta and in Canada but worldwide are very much under attack.
Mhm.
Would you want to talk about that a little bit about your interest and your focus on farmers and the farming community, which are obviously very, very vital people in our communities because without them, we have nothing to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. By keeping my boots on the ground, I'm definitely connected to the grassroots people, and that would include farmers.
Hmm.
So I early, very early, that's my neighbors. My neighbors are farmers. I live in a very rural, remote area. I have cows in one area, horses in the other. So we do spend a lot of time understanding each other and the hard work that we do. Now, what I noticed was the CPC party, my candidate here, he was advancing liberal loans to the farmers and not standing up to the
Really?
global agenda when it came to bringing forward fertilizer
Hmm.
requirements of a 30% reduction. I spoke to my neighbors and they were very concerned about their yields being affected by this, and that wasn't
Right.
being
Yeah.
covered with the current conversation. So I took it upon myself, and this is right around the time where I decided I need to help fight for my neighbors. I took it upon myself to reach out to Agriculture Canada. I was speaking to one of their scientists there. I have this as part of my Twitter profile, where I was asking the questions about the 30% reduction requirement. That conversation led me to the realization that they didn't know. The answer in the end was you're too late with these questions, and if you want these answers, you need global sources. This is what was written to me. So that made me fully understand that even Agricultural Canada, which was based here in Alberta, had no
Hmm.
idea why it is that they're bringing forward this 30% reduction of fertilizer for nitrogen purposes, and they couldn't even articulate to a Canadian who asked them for the reasons for it. This opened up a real big concern for me
Hmm.
when my own constituent, my own MP wouldn't touch this subject. Now, I do have to give him a little bit of credit. When the request for comment period expired on this particular issue, which I was pushing hard on prior to the expiry because I wanted it to be extended so we can go ahead and get the answers. The day after it closed is when you heard the CPC party push back on this particular issue the day after the request for comment closed officially. So I found that to be something that I just couldn't align myself with. If farmers have questions and they should get the answers, the response from the government and the party that represents them shouldn't be too little too late. One of the things that really struck me was I was the first to ask these questions when I would expect these questions to be asked a long time ago from
Right.
several different MPs, including the MP that was a shadow MP for agricultural Minister of Agriculture. That is an Alberta MP here. He should have been asking the same questions a long time ago as a requirement for this request for comment. But my surprise was nobody did until I did. And the response was, you're too late to ask those questions. So we're going to move forward.
Hmm.
I have no power. I wrote a letter to the MPs. I wrote a letter to Agriculture Canada. I wrote a letter to everybody that should be responsible for extending the period time to allow farmers to learn the reasons for it and have their responses. But unfortunately, with no MP power and no ability to persuade at that level, unfortunately, the request for comment closed, and they are now moving ahead with this requirement for a 30% reduction in nitrogen, which will impact the yield of my neighbors, and that will drive an economic driver down the wrong direction when it comes to whether or not they can maintain their farms going forward. So I have a big concern for my neighbors, and I do want to bring issues like that forward when nobody else does.
Yeah, Jason, I'd like to just flesh this out a little bit. You raise a really important issue about our farmers. Of course, we see the situation over in Europe where in countries like Germany and the Netherlands, France, and Belgium, the farmers are getting on their tractors and they're
Mm.
protesting this globalist drive to basically annihilate food production. through nitrogen control in the name of really it's Marxism being done in the name of climate change or climate protection. We haven't yet seen the same level of awareness as you were just talking about, and we haven't seen the same level of activism by farmers in, say, the United States and Canada. Do you have an idea about that? What's your take on that? Why aren't farmers in places like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia, or in Ontario more concerned about this the way their sort of comrades in arms are over in Europe?
Well, it's an excellent segue to January 2022 when the farmers in Alberta did just that. So the Coutts blockade was a farmer-led with trucker coalition, I guess you can say, because there was a large amount of farm equipment
Yeah,
involved
quite
in that.
so. Yeah, yeah.
And that is definitely where farmers started to poke their nose out when it came to advocacy and standing up. There's no
Hmm.
question.
Hmm.
I also understand that the farmers, for now, understand the consequences to that. There were some consequences. Laws have changed, and things have gotten pretty serious for anybody that participated in that. I do believe that narrative is falling apart, as we're seeing here in Alberta when it comes to the Coutts men, and I wouldn't take off the table in any way, shape, or form the idea of the farmers standing up again soon. I do think maybe what they're waiting for is a couple more things like the Mosley decision, which did make it clear that there is protesting rights in Canada, that we're
Hmm.
allowed to do that. I think
Right.
another decision soon, maybe around the organizers, because the Coutts organizers are about to hit trial. So
Yeah.
if that ends up being withdrawn or stayed, or something happens where that isn't a thing anymore, where organizing the protest is something that you have to worry about, then I absolutely think farmers are going to stand up again if the government continues the current mandate of fertilizer, water, and funding. So
Hmm.
when it comes to the loans that the governments are providing, that's putting farmers into a situation where they're likely going to default. They're going after fertilizer, as we spoke about, and they're now going after the water supply in
Hmm.
order to control how much water is used by farmers. So I do think very soon, if needed, you may see a larger response here in Canada when it comes to farmers. I hope not. I hope ideally there's no need, but I do think if we're looking at this fairly, the farmers did stand up in January, February 2022. They understood how far their government's willing to go. And now we're at the stage of understanding if the government could do that again. And I think with the Mosley decision and some other things happening here in Alberta, I think the government is going to learn that we can protest, and maybe they should pay more attention to us when we do protest. So maybe we don't have to protest. I think that that's the kind of stage we're at right now.
Your podcast and your journalism has become one of the best known and most trustworthy sources of information about the Coutts War. You've taken a deep dive into this case. What was it that drew you to this, and why have you felt that it was so important to tell the story of what happened there, of what's happening there, I should say?
Sure. So when I when I brought my show back after the POEC closed and there was no longer a reason to stream the POEC, I had to reevaluate what kind of show did I want. And very quickly, it became obvious to me that I enjoyed talking to people. So I started by having Tom Marazzo on as a guest. One Monday morning, I asked him to come on. He said yes. And I
He's written a
enjoyed
great
that.
book, by the way, folks, if you haven't yet
Yeah.
read it. Probably the best
Yeah.
book on the Freedom Convoy so far. Sorry to interrupt you, Jason, but
Not
want
a
to get a
problem.
plug in there for our mutual friend.
For sure. And it's the best book on the convoy because I haven't written one yet. Maybe one
Well,
day. But
we can look forward to that.
But he was a fabulous guest where I was able to talk about the POEC, his appearance there, and other topics, including his book. This was just before his book came out. And then I decided at that point, well, maybe I will try and get all 76 witnesses from the POEC, Public Order Emergency Commission. The
Oh,
76th
wow.
witness there is Justin Trudeau. So it's a pretty ambitious list of people to try and get. But that's the kind of person I am. I went and looked at that list and said, let's try and get them all on.
Have you
So Tom
invited
Marazzo,
the Prime Minister to be on your show? I have to ask that.
no, not yet, but I have invited Jody
Oh,
Thomas.
really?
Yeah, Yeah, no luck yet, but she's on the list, and I did invite her after her appearance recently on the news where she's still propagating the narrative, which has been disproven by now. But I did invite her on. But back to my little story. So Tom Marazzo was off, and then another guest. I ended up getting Pat King, Chris Barber, making my way through the list. So that was the initial motivation to reach out to Twitter and say, hey, can you guys connect me to these people? Anybody on the POEC? One of the gentlemen, actually two of the gentlemen on the POEC that I tried to reach out to was the mayor of Coutts and Marco Van Hoosenbos, who was a witness from Coutts. There was also Alberta, the government of Alberta, and other people, but when it came to the Coutts people, these were two people I thought that I had an ability to reach out to. So at that point, I realized, wait a minute, I need to contact not just people on the POEC list, but also this Coutts situation. That's when I put out a tweet and I said, hey, I'm looking into POEC and Coutts witnesses. Anybody that was a witness to those two events, I'm interested in speaking to. That's when I got put into contact with Margaret McKay, who is known as Granny around Alberta, who's been supporting the men and bringing advocacy and awareness to them. And very quickly, I learned their story, got connected to some of the family members, and very quickly, I fell in love with all of the people involved and in the cause. When I realized very quickly a couple things. One, these gentlemen are getting special treatment to stay in remand because they didn't have bail. And this was after a year or so, year and a half almost, of when they were put in there. I got involved on day 495 of their incarceration, so just over a year of incarceration, and we're now at day 740 something. So I've been involved for that period of time. Yeah. So I fell in love with the story of what was going on because of my POEC coverage. I understood that the Coutts situation was one of the pieces of information that was done in camera. So we didn't get to see the information and know what happened. But we do know that the report concluded that it was all true. Everything that happened in Coutts was true. In order to support the decision from Rouleau, Coutts became a very, very important conversation. And then when I spent some time looking into it, and seeing things like this picture was provided to the press within hours, and the evidence wasn't handled in a way that can be used as evidence in court. Like, it'd be very difficult to fingerprint and DNA and do other things to this evidence. When I started realizing these things, we knew we had a problem. And that's when I looked into the publication ban and the reason why none of the media is touching it. And then I realized, unfortunately, that's being misrepresented. There is no media ban. There's a publication ban on certain items, and you certainly can be press and report on this stuff, but they weren't. So that's when I knew we had to spend more time on Coutts. It wasn't getting coverage at all. And that's really what drew me in for the last 300 and something days on it.
Do you have an idea or a theory about why the mass media, the global news and the CBC and the CTVs of the world are basically ignoring what has to be one of the most important stories of our time in this country and even globally? You have Tucker Carlson, the most watched media personality in the world right now, coming to Edmonton and Calgary and talking specifically about the Coutts 4. He even had somebody on his show to talk about the Coutts 4. And yet the Canadian mass media, as I talked about formerly, our most trusted source of news and information, is completely ignoring this story. Why do you think that's happening, Jason?
Well, when I first started, I thought it was a simple excuse of the government doesn't want the state media to do it. So immediately I said CBC, CTV, Global, the regular players, I guess they're under some sort of order not to. That was my presumption at that stage. Sure. And that's
true. That's horrifying, isn't it?
Sure. But where I actually got concerned is when I reached out to alt media. So this would be the Rebels, the Western Standard, and the True Norths of our country. This would be considered the well-established alt media. I won't tell you who, and I won't even gender the person, but one of my contacts at one of those organizations, I reached out to and said, hey, I'm looking into Coutts. Can you share any information with me? Can you tell me what you've done? Because this news organization did have some coverage early, but nothing more recent.
Right.
And the response I got from that one is where I really got concerned. And that was, I know one of the men involved. I grew up with one of the men involved. there's no way that guy did that, knowing him, his family, and otherwise. I can't help you. Please keep going. There's a story here. So
Oh,
getting that message out of alt media really made me go, huh, well, what in the world is he or she not sharing with me? Because they absolutely are too worried about even talking about their relationship with one of the people involved and their personal direct experience with that person.
mhm.
And they won't touch this subject. That really got the hair on the back of my neck up when alt media was staying away from it. The next one that really put a flag on me, and I think I'm going to be able to answer your question now with this one, is Fox News down in the United States, having a conversation with them behind the scenes about whether or not they would cover the story. I won't say which host it was, but there was a conversation. And the conversation simply said, well, there's a media ban on this issue. Everybody knows we can't touch it. And my response to them was, no, there isn't. There's a publication ban on certain items, but you can talk about the rest of it. Their insistence that there is a media ban, which was the same language being used by alt media and mainstream media in Canada and other places in the world, made me realize that likely the Trusted News Initiative, which is out of the UK, provided that narrative in some way, that mainstream and most media that's associated with that got the memo that there's a publication or media ban on the Coutts situation. Stay away from it. There would be litigation if you got involved in it. And it's improper and it's not even accurate, that particular narrative. But when I saw alt media say I can't touch that, likely for litigation reasons, but they couldn't provide that to me. And then even Fox News saying, no, we're not touching that. That's when I knew it was bigger than even just our media not touching it. There's likely a bigger narrative here on not telling the truth about these political prisoners in Canada. And I believe that that was to ensure that the narrative for the invocation of the EA, in general, countries coming down hard on their citizens in fear of their citizens and putting in place certain things so that their citizens don't take control or fight back. That was a global issue. And then the Coutts narrative being shut down was a global initiative. That's what I believe at this stage. And that's why the Tuckers and the Elons and the others who are not part of that particular organization, Trusted News Initiative, do seem to be willing to talk about this.
Mhm.
And that would include Newsweek and myself.
Yeah, well, but you've not just been covering this as a news story, as a sort of an intellectual exercise. You have actually taken the time to get to know these men and to get to know their families. Why did you think it was important to do so?
I didn't think, to be honest with you. I kind of just followed. And I didn't realize I did that until one of the families sat me down and actually asked that question. I was basically interviewed by one of the family members because they don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing either. So they asked me, they said, why is it that you're spending your own money, your own time, coming down to Lethbridge, going to the court, talking to everybody, doing a show about it? Why are you doing that? And I didn't really have a good answer because I actually really don't know why I'm doing that. Calling, a desire to get to the truth. I don't like the fact that Canadians were attacked in Ottawa and in Coutts. I don't like the fact that Canadians can be arrested and held without trial or bail. And then I started to get paranoid that if I am ever picked up by my government, am I going to have the same future? And if
Mm,
that's the case, I need to vitiate or get rid of that potential now, because if they can pick up these gentlemen who, at the time the evidence was showing, and now that two have been released, the evidence has been vindicated that it wasn't what the media said it was. Well, then any one of us, including you, Leighton, could find ourselves in a predicament because our government doesn't like what we're saying.
yeah,
So
without
I
question.
think my desire to keep exposing this and to make sure that we have platforms that expose this is in case one day I'm on the wrong end of my government. And
Hmm.
I hope that other people like you and others who do platforms like this would be there for me too. So
Hmm.
maybe that's kind of my indirect
I can
reason
tell
for
you
this
right now,
particular issue.
hand to heart, hand to heart, we'll be there for you if it
Oh
happens.
boy.
And I know the reverse is true. But you know what you just said, Jason, really struck me, because what I was saying off the top of the show about sort of the, let's say, viewing journalism in its best light, right?
Mm,
The picture of a journalist as a truth seeker, as somebody who is interested in exposing injustice, and making other people aware of it so that it can be rooted out and fought and destroyed. Um, isn't it ironic that here you are, a serial entrepreneur, someone with homesteading background. You're not from Carleton University School of Journalism.
no.
You didn't come out of Harvard. So here, all of the quote unquote classically trained journalists are turning their noses up, or I guess burying their heads in the sand on this very important story. And yet here you are, living out really the best virtues, the best principles of journalism, by covering the story and without question putting yourself potentially at some degree of risk.
Mm.
Um, I find that a little bit ironic. Do you see what I'm saying, or you have some thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Because I'm told all the time you need to be accredited. You have to do things a certain way. Nobody's going to trust you. Nobody's going to find you credible. Like these are all the hurdles that I have all the time, including reporting in Alberta courts. I can't
Yeah.
sit in the section that says accredited with undertaking. I've been denied on my application to do that, even though I got accreditation through the Independent Press Gallery of Canada. I'm still struggling with being able to be recognized as an independent journalist inside the courts here in Alberta. But the irony is, I would say I think that the trouble for the establishment with me is I didn't get indoctrinated. I didn't get into a system that
Mhm.
told me it has to be a certain way and you have to
Yeah.
do it a certain way and you have to take it from your editor or you have to follow. Like I wasn't indoctrinated into that system. So I think I'm more of a naive. And this is why I relate more to like a bloodhound who's just following the path wherever it goes versus a German Shepherd who's been trained and will go on command to do whatever.
Hmm.
Even a drug sniffing dog, under training, they're trained to do certain things. And that's why I see I'm like different. I'm quite literally, I came out of the bush as a tech guy with a little bit of law and my pilot's license, and that's my training. And then I took my desire to follow the truth, and it's going to get me in trouble because I'm going to establish relationships and maybe not the way I should. I might make mistakes in my reporting. I might use one source when I should have two. Like I'll make mistakes along the way and then learn from them.
The CBC
Um,
doesn't bother to have any source.
no, but it also gave me this different way of looking at it, which is a naive way, but I
Yeah,
see it in a certain light that I don't think I would have seen if I went as a profession or a desire to become, which will happen if
right.
you go through journalism school.
Right.
So
But
I
there's a
didn't have that.
sincerity to your reporting and an authenticity to it that those other people lack. There's a great movie from the 1940s that what you were just saying reminds me of. It's called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Stars
Mm,
Jimmy Stewart, and it's about this guy, sort of a naive kid he's from some state like Kansas, and he goes to Washington. He doesn't know anything about all the backroom deals and the brokering and all of that,
mm,
pork belly politics in Washington. And so it's a very fascinating story. We're just saying, sort of remind me of that, about how somebody sort of enters into a situation with some degree of naivete, but their principles and their integrity sort of guide them through, and in some ways actually expose, sort of the lack of those principles in the people who are part of that system. And perhaps that's why you're getting some resistance from the journalism world, is they're seeing that you're practicing a more, let's say, authentic style of journalism, not as much of a commercial one, one that's, let's say, owned by the Liberal Party of Canada. Leaving that off to the side, let's talk about these men for a second, because you've gotten to
yeah.
know all of them. Um, James Sowery has been
Hmm.
sentenced, and the other two have been sentenced. Can you talk about those three men who have now been sentenced, and then we could maybe talk about the two who are still going to are still in custody and facing trial. So tell us about James Sowery and the other two who have been sentenced for a little bit, because some people might not be aware of the story yet.
Sure. So James Sowery was convicted by jury for the act of dangerous driving and assault with a weapon. The weapon being his truck, and the dangerous driving would be coming too close to a police officer checkpoint and not stopping. That's really the general situation. He was leaving Coutts on his way home on the 14th of February when he didn't stop. This is agreed upon facts where he didn't stop at a checkpoint, was later pulled over, and then charged for putting the life of the officer at the checkpoint in danger. He was found guilty by jury and was sentenced to 10 months, and he just started that about a month ago. So he's got about 9 more months to go. He does have an appeal written, but not filed, and he's working on fundraising to go ahead with that appeal. And that appeal is based off of Charter 8 violation, a couple of them, incompetent representation, and possibly fresh evidence. So there's a potential appeal there, which he is hopeful that he'll advance at some point.
Does he have a lawyer right now, Jason?
He has a lawyer who did the work, but he doesn't have the retainer to file and do the work. So that's the stage he's at now. He has an appeal written that we believe would be successful if he has the ability to bring it forward. So that would be James Sowery. He is not known as one of the 4 Coutts men who was in remand. So there was 4 gentlemen, which you see them behind me here. All 4 of those gentlemen were arrested on the 13th or 14th of February, 2022. And until recently, they were all held pre-trial, no bail. The 2 that you're referring to that came out, got sentenced and came out after a plea agreement is Chris Lysick and Jerry Morin. So Chris Lysick was one of the gentlemen who was facing uttering a threat, possession of a firearm for illegal purposes or dangerous purposes, conspiracy to commit murder, mischief over 5,000, and I believe there was another one for improper handling or improper storage of a firearm. So he had 5 charges, and then Jeremy Morin had conspiracy to commit murder, mischief, and possession of a weapon for dangerous purpose. So they had 3 charges that were the same, and then Lysick had 2 additional charges that were separate from the rest. Both of those gentlemen ended up pleading recently. Chris Lysick ended up pleading to possession of a registered and restricted firearm that was loaded and not where it should be. So a license violation, and he got sentenced to time served and has been released. Jerry Morin has
essentially like about 3 years jail with credit for time served, right? So still a lengthy sentence, wasn't it?
I don't know I think he had 2.5, and I think and Morin had the 3.5 plus time served.
Okay.
Plus double time. Yeah, because Morin, his charge that he pled to was conspiracy to traffic weapons for the illegal purpose.
Okay.
So that's a more serious charge than Lysick admitted to. And then, of course, Jerry has additional information that he's providing to the Crown that the Crown will bring forward against the other 2 gentlemen. So Chris Carbert and Tony Olenek, who are still remanded pre-trial, no bail. But we will be going back to court February 20th, which will be next week. And we're filming this, or we're recording this on my birthday. So the anniversary is my birthday as well, February 14th. But we'll go back on the 20th to find out if the next pretrial application will be successful, which is to do a Charter 8 application for the ITO number 1, it's been referred to as, which is the ITO that was based on wiretaps. So there'll be a challenge on that by Chris Carbert and his lawyer. And that's what we'll go with that. We'll continue with the pretrial, and we're looking at trials starting late May throughout June 2024. And hopefully we'll get a decision before we get near the Jordan decision date, which will be August to October, somewhere in there.
Right. So those 2 men are still facing trial. Are they both represented by counsel right now?
They are. Yeah. Good, so good. At one point, Tony Olenek was not. But when we went back on the 6th of February, which was to continue the pretrial, we learned at that date that he now has a new lawyer who's on record. And we'll be going back on the 20th to give his new lawyer time to go through disclosure and prepare for being present on the 20th. So that was why there was an adjournment.
Is there a revised application for bail coming, or is that, or have they exhausted their avenues in terms of gaining judicial interim release?
Well, on a legal level, they haven't exhausted all options for bail, but on a practical level, I believe they have. So
Right.
Chris Lysick was the most recent one who did a bail application, and it was denied recently. And it took close to 6 or 7 months for that bail application process to make its way to a decision. It's
Wow.
not as easy as just applying for bail. You have to find something that will require the court to reevaluate the
Right.
decision.
Material
And the
change in circumstances, right? Yeah.
Correct. There's a whole hearing on whether or not the threshold to reopen the decision
Yeah.
has been met. Now, in Chris Carbert's situation, he was successful at that stage of the bail review because he was able to have another bail hearing. But unfortunately for him, at that point, the decision was meant to keep him in a little bit longer. Tony Olenek and the rest of the gentlemen at that stage didn't put a bail application in because they were all waiting for the results of Chris Carbert's. This is a very
Mhm.
expensive and lengthy process. So they were like waiting to see how that turned out for him. Now that he's been denied and the trial is going to be started in May, I don't anticipate any more bail attempts unless something really material has
Mhm.
changed. And I don't think the release of these two gentlemen would qualify for that. In fact, the
Mhm.
Morin release does provide the Crown with another witness against these gentlemen. So I
Mhm.
do think that even if another attempt was made at a bail hearing, the Crown's position might have strengthened. So I don't think practically there will be any ability to actually change that decision.
Wow.
And I do believe the men understand that.
Well, one thing we know is that you'll continue to cover that story and reveal the truth about it to Canadians, for which we're grateful. One of the important things that's come out of this, and I would say that your reporting of the story has contributed to this, is that we are now actually seeing some mass media outlets begin to cover the story. There was a recent story, as you know, that was actually brought out in Newsweek, one
Yeah.
of the largest syndicated news services in the United States and indeed in the world. And the cover story was "Meet the four men being held as political prisoners in Canada." Wow, I mean that story would not have run even 3 months ago. But I would say that your reporting, in combination with some of the other things we talked about, Tucker Carlson and so on, the word really is getting out about these men, isn't it?
Yeah, and what I can actually speak to specifically about that one is that was authored by Gord McGill, and that is Gord McGill's third article as an opinion piece in Newsweek. His first article was after he sourced an interview with us, so me. He came on my show a couple of times, met with some of the family members, and was investigating the Coutts situation for his article in Newsweek, the original one, back in 2023. And that really was the first time any mainstream media picked it up. From that point on, Gord continued to work with us, get more details. He created a second story. And Gord is the one who was on Tucker Carlson. So Gord McGill was able to speak to Tucker Carlson for about 30 minutes about the Coutts situation. So I do agree with you that it was through the work of Donald and myself and others that brought forward this story, brought Gord to the table, introduced it to him, opened up Newsweek, and eventually found him on Tucker. And then Tucker is speaking to Danielle Smith about it here in Alberta. I do believe that that was the result of a lot of effort from a lot of people stemming from the inclusion on this show.
Hmm. Well, of course, we talked a lot about the Coutts situation because you've covered it so extensively. But certainly, that's not all that you're doing. You've also spent a lot of time covering the National Citizens Inquiry, and in fact, recently, you were appointed to a very important position by the inquiry, and you're doing a lot of work with them right now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the National Citizens Inquiry?
Absolutely. So, like most startups, when they start up, they have something in mind when they get going. And like most successful startups, at some point there's going to be pivots and changes in the future. So what ended up happening with the NCI is they started up and did their inquiry, and then they got to the point where they needed to figure out what to do next. So there ended up being two different ideas about how to move forward. One was to go ahead and close the inquiries, call it a day, and bring it forward in a prosperity and in a promotion type of way to get people aware of the report, bring it to the government, and try and really advance it and leverage it as a tool for change. And then there was another group of people who wanted to just keep doing inquiries and just keep doing this forever. Of course, both of those are wonderful, wonderful missions, but it did lead to a situation where it needed to be figured out how to move forward.
Right.
So, as part of my interviewing, I interviewed dozens of people from the NCI. I have done maybe 10 shows specifically on the NCI in different avenues. In fact, you were on one of them as we
Yes.
talked about the litigation value of the NCI with Ken Drysdale, who was one of the commissioners.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my work on that, I got really familiar with and intimate with all the people involved, and I had great relationships with it. So when it became known that there was going to be a question in the public to answer what the future of the NCI looks like, I was pulled in very early so that I understood that this question was coming. Now, how we deal with questions like this is always a challenge, whether we do it publicly, privately, a hybrid of both. But we needed to figure out, and I say we colloquially now because I was kind of brought in early, we needed to figure out how to advance this. So after interviewing all the parties that be, I got nominated at one stage to be an informal mediator. I'm using that word carefully
Wonderful.
because I'm not licensed as a mediator, but I can function as an informal mediator who's trying to advance understandings between groups.
Right.
So I was nominated, and then I was accepted by the other side, and that's exactly what I did. I spent some time with various members of the NCI and people that have a stake in the MCI, including witnesses who participated. And through very little negotiation and conversation, I can report very quickly that it wasn't difficult to align everybody to some understandings that gave everybody the opportunity to advance their mission. And on February 14th, which is what we're at right now, I can report that I'm expecting a positive outcome to be announced any moment now, that the NCI will continue forever to continue to hold our government accountable and look into issues that are important to Canadians. And the NCI Final Report 2023, which addressed COVID and whether or not the COVID mandates and approvals were valid, is going to move forward. And we will see a lot more promotion and advancement of the prosperity of that particular report done by a group who's very passionate to get this done quickly. So I'm happy to report that we're going to have a new NCI, which is going to be called the National Citizens Inquiry, and it's a nonprofit organization. It will continue with the name, the brand, and the social media, while this other entity is going to take a copy of the report and start to hold our government accountable by bringing it to the globe so we could all understand what it is the Canadian government did.
Brilliant.
So I was lucky enough to be part of that,
Yeah.
and we can report we're going to have two organizations now who are fighting for Canadians, not just one. And we have a clearer path forward how the NCI will continue to provide inquiries, provide reports, and hold people accountable. So I'm very pleased that the outcome was
and I'm
achieved.
so glad that you're doing that. They couldn't have chosen a better person for that job. I happen to think that the NCI is the most important public legal education endeavor of my lifetime. And it's a shame that more people don't know about it. And but the work that you and others are doing, I know will change that. So that's wonderful. I wish you much continued success with that. Jason, we've come to the part of our show where we wrap up. We've taken up some of your time. We know how busy you are with all the shows and investigations that you're doing. This is the part of the program where we have something called the reading list. And
Mm.
so here we give you the opportunity to point some of our listeners and viewers to sources of information, whether they're books or websites or whatever, that you think would be valuable to give them maybe greater insight, a deeper knowledge of some of the topics that we've been talking about, some of the things that you investigate and report on as part of your work. I'm going to start off, and then I'm going to give you the last word. So I have a
Okay.
book that I found that you've probably seen. It's called Eyewitness to Deceit. And this is a book by Danny Bulford, who I believe has been on your show.
Mm. Yes.
And Tom McGuigan. This is with Tom Guigan and Rick Gill. There's a preface, I should say, by Corporal Danny Bulford. He writes the preface, but Tom Guigan worked within Freedom Convoy in 2022 in intelligence capacity. His work was to prepare analytical reports to provide protective intelligence for Freedom Convoy 22, first responders, and general public in Ottawa. He has over 30 years of experience and deployed operational experience. He was able to witness the campaign of deceit run by the government of Canada against its own citizens. Of course, all of this now has been revealed in greater detail. But this book tells the story of how the mainstream media played its compliant role. The CBC, for instance, twice created evidence-free stories about how the Russians and Putin were behind the convoy's organization, that it was American money, and claims that terrorist money was involved. So a lot of willful lies about the convoy being perpetrated by their prime minister. So this book tells this whole story, in great detail, and so it's a worthwhile book to look back on what happened. Given that we're at the 2-year anniversary right now, and everybody's talking about it, I happen to think it would be worthwhile to have a national date of remembrance for the Freedom Convoy, and I think I would fully support the commissioning of a statue that would be erected there on the grounds where the Freedom Convoy occurred. And so if anybody's out there and wants to raise some money and take up that torch, I'd be happy to get behind you and march in your parade. The other book it tells a story about sort of a collateral American situation. This is January 6th. And Jason, you might agree there are some interesting parallels between the
Mm-hmm.
Coutts War and January 6th prisoners. We actually had a guest on our show from the United States who's doing a lot of the same work that you are, but on behalf of the January 6th prisoners. This book is called January 6th, How the Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. And this book is analogous because a lot of the same type of political interests, a lot of the same chicanery, a lot of the same, frankly, evil is being applied in the January 6th situation as is being done in the situation with the Coutts prisoners. And
Mm.
so I think it's useful for people to see that and see some of the parallels, because just as we talked about how the farmers are being beset upon throughout the world, and we see it seems as though all of these horrible ideas are coming from the same source. It's interesting to see some of the parallels with the January 6th situation versus what's happening in Coutts. So anyway, those are my two selections, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jason and give you the last word.
Well, I think there's some excellent options and books to read there, especially the one about Jan 6, because if you can understand that there's a parallel between what happened in Coutts and Jan 6, you might be able to zoom out a little bit further to see that happen in Venezuela, happen in Germany, it's happened in France, it's happened in Netherlands. Then you'll start to understand that maybe these are not local isolated issues, that maybe there's a thread all the way through. That's a common thread. So that's why I will recommend two books. The first one is going to be The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. I
Right.
think everybody should read that one, not as an instruction manual on what you think should happen, and you certainly don't have to read it from the perspective of agreeing with him, but I think you should take a closer look at what it is that he's openly suggesting that should happen on a global stage. If
Right.
you do read this book, then you may be able to take it a step further than the Jan 6 book to understand that this is by design, and it is exactly going the way that they're expecting it to, except for Canada resisted far more than they thought it would. So that's a good note to leave Canadians on. The second book I'm going to put out there I'm going to have to plug myself because there's a really good reason why I wrote Bearing Witness. So this is a book I have available. And you can go onto my website, thelavigneshow.com, and get a free copy, a digital copy, because I think the information is far more important than the merchandisability of it. So it's called Bearing Witness, the ethical, legal, and practical guide to recording and sharing history. So what I'm doing with my show is I'm basically doing what I teach in my book, which is to get out there, search for the truth, record the truth, share the truth, and make it valuable so it can be used in ways like media, education, or even litigation. I have chapters in this book that understand that there's going to be mental impact. You're going to actually have some sort of mental trauma as you're doing this type of work. You're going to be attacked for the work that you're doing. You're going to see things that are going to be traumatic sometimes. So this book takes you through how to mentally prepare yourself and make sure that you are somebody that can bear witness and then help bring value from that. So I do believe that my work and other work from people similar to this is how we get out of this darkness of falsehood and narratives. We need thousands of people and thousands of shows to be exposing this. So that book, I give it away for free for the purpose of helping people understand the value of a good witness in society and how to become one. So those will be the two books, The Great Reset and Bearing Witness.
Thank you for those selections, Jason, especially for mentioning your own book. I'd be interested to read that myself, and I'm going to ask you right now, if you wouldn't mind, if you would dedicate a copy to me and provide that to me. I'd be most grateful. And also, I want to urge you to consider, and you probably have considered, writing a book about your experiences with the Coutts 4. I mean, there have been several books about the Freedom Convoy, but unless I'm mistaken, nobody's written a book yet about that story. And it seems to me you would be one of the best people to do that. So I'd be I'd be one of the first ones lining up to read your book about the Coutts 4. In any case, I want to thank you so much for being our special guest here today and for sharing with our viewers and listeners your experiences and getting to know you a little bit better. I'm very grateful to you for the work that you do as an investigator, as a podcaster. I'm especially indebted to you for sort of drawing me into the vortex of the Coutts 4 story, because I have to be honest, I'm one of the people who wasn't paying close enough attention to it. And it was because of people like you, especially you, that I began to pay more attention to it and to see the injustice that was being done there. And so I'm indebted to you for doing that. And we wish you, of course, much continued success with your podcast and all of the incredible investigative journalism that you are doing. And I hope that at some point I'm going to be able to refer to you as the Honorable Jason Lavigne after the next federal election. But in any case, God bless you and thank you so much for being our special guest here today on Grey Matter.
Thank you very much, Leighton, for having me. It's been a pleasure to become close to you and maybe even become a friend to you. I do appreciate the fact that you see this journalism for what it is, and that is an honest effort to help Canada. So thank you for having me on, and God bless you as well.
Thank you, Jason.